Hello, everyone, and welcome to our first virtual Nature's Hidden Surprises today, with the topic being protecting our watershed. I am Ryan. I do some of the stuff we work on in Montgomery County, but I'm just introducing the topic here today and just a little bit specifically about using Zoom. So we're going to have a section about halfway through for any questions you have. So if a question pops up as we go along, just type it in the chat box. So you can find the chat box at the bottom of your screen. If you pull up the tab, there'll be a little section that says chat, and then you can enter your questions in there, and then we will ask them and answer them at a set point during the presentation. So now I'm going to turn it over to Dorian, who works on the Philadelphia team and is going to be doing the majority of the presenting today.
Thank you, Ryan. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's so good to see you. All right, so today we're going to talk about protecting our watershed. As Ryan mentioned, my name is Dorian de Angel. I'm the community watershed leader for the Tookanita-Coney-Frankford Watershed Partnership. And we are an environmental nonprofit. And our mission is to improve the health and vitality of our watershed of the Tookanita-Coney-Frankford Creek. And we do that through 4 ways. We do that by collaborating with our municipalities and our communities through stewardship efforts, education, such as this presentation here, educating about what a watershed is, restoration efforts to help improve the creek quality, and also advocacy. Next. Next slide. All right. So what we'll be covering today is the basics of what is a watershed. In order to understand what a watershed is, we'll then be able to learn what are some of the impacts affecting our watershed. And then we'll end with some simple steps and strategies that you can do from home that will help improve some of the impacts that are affecting our watershed. Next. So first things first, what is a watershed? So this graphic is a simple demonstration of what it is. So wherever we are, it rains. It's the natural system. So because it rains wherever we are, that rain needs to go somewhere. Water always flows down. In this graphic, what's outlined in the yellow lines, that's one of the outer boundaries of one of the watersheds of this area of land. So you have an area of land that has some high points, some low points. All within this area of land, there's different land uses. You see some agriculture on the right. You see an urban city, and there's smaller creeks and streams at the very top of the mountain. So you can imagine that as it's raining, that water is flowing over the land, and the land is guiding all that water to the lowest point to a specific body of water. So a watershed is an area of land that sheds water to a specific body of water at the end. At the very top where it says divide, we call those headwaters. That's exactly where the creek or stream is born, the headwaters of a watershed. And as it flows down, it almost looks like a tree. So the tributaries are like the branches of that tree, and it all flows down to a main stem, a main trunk. And that main stem of the trunk of the watershed is usually what gets its name from. And then that trunk then disperses out as its roots, which would be the larger body of water, and eventually ending up into the ocean. So again, watershed, area of land that sheds water to a specific body of water. Next slide. So this is a map of the Philadelphia County, and this is just to demonstrate, based off that initial definition of a watershed, this shows all the different shapes that watersheds can have. So Philadelphia alone has 7 different watersheds that are marked by the different colors. So if you can notice, the shape of the watershed doesn't follow municipal boundaries. It follows its own geographical pattern, because the shapes of watersheds are defined by the landscape, by the geography, by those high points and low points. So if you see the watershed in green, which is the Wissahickon, all the land, whenever it rains, all the rainfall that's falling on the green area is all gonna flow into the Wissahickon Creek. It's not gonna flow into the blue watershed, which is the Pennypack. They all become their own separate watersheds. So all these 7 watersheds, they have one thing in common. If you notice, all these watersheds are flowing to one specific body of water, which is the Delaware River at the bottom there. So this is important because this shows that no matter where you are, if you're at the Schuylkill, if you're at the Wissahickon, the Pennypack, we are all in a watershed in any other part of the world. And that water is flowing to a specific place. In our case, it's flowing to the Delaware River, which is the main source of water for Philadelphia. And all these other watersheds contribute to that main source. Next slide. So this is, I love this picture because the first definition of an area of land, when you see the picture on the left, the natural environment, you can clearly see during a rainstorm, where that water is gonna go. You know, there's a rain cloud, it's gonna flow over those mountains. Some of that water is gonna soak into the leaves, into the ground, eventually making its way into the river. But the image on the bottom right, this is an urban environment. Now again, because watersheds are areas of land, this urban environment is also a watershed. It's more plain, it's more flat, and you can see that there's also less trees. So if it were to rain in the urban environment, you can imagine that a lot of the water is not going to be soaking into the ground. So they're both different watershed landscapes, but the land use plays different, it affects the dynamics of the way water flows. Next slide. So this is a graphic that's demonstrating that difference. So the one on the left is the natural environment. So when you have rain, you have, if you see that larger arrow, the subsurface flow, you have a lot of soil that's going to be able to absorb all that extra rainwater. And then you have less of it flowing over the surface. So that's what we call runoff. So it's either surface runoff, or it's also called stormwater. So when it's in the air, it's called rain, but once it lands on the ground, it's called runoff, stormwater runoff. If you see the image on the right, the urban environment, if you have that same amount of rain falling, where you have less soil, less trees, less opportunity for that rainwater to soak into the ground, you can see that the arrow for surface runoff is a lot larger than the infiltration one. So you have a lot more runoff in an urban environment than you would in a natural environment. Next slide. So for our case, this is a map of our Tacony-Tacony-Frankford watershed. It's about 30 square miles, and it has areas of Montgomery County up in the northern section, mainly Cheltenham, and you have also portions of Jenkintown, Abington, a little bit of Springfield and Rockledge. And then the area in yellow, that other area, all that is Philadelphia. So our watershed is mostly urban. There's not a lot of green parks like you see some of the green areas in the map. So it's mostly residential use. So more of an urban environment means there's going to be a lot more surface runoff going into the main stem of the creek. So if you notice at the Montgomery County section, the headwaters, you have, that's called the Tacony Creek. The Tacony Creek has a lot of smaller streams and tributaries. Once it crosses into the yellow area of the map, into Philadelphia, the creek changes its name from Tacony to Tacony, and that's basically the main stem of the Tacony Creek Park. And just about near the south end, the creek changes its name again to the Frankford Creek. And that's why it's called the Tacony-Tacony-Frankford Creek, and meeting the Delaware River just below the Betsy Ross Bridge. So that's why we call it TTF for short. And Tacony in Montgomery County, Tacony in Philadelphia, and Frankford in the Frankfurt area. So in the Montgomery County section, because there's a lot more smaller creeks and streams, there's opportunities to do some restoration projects in order to help reduce some of that flow when it rains and slow down the water as it makes its trajectory to the main creek. And this also helps improve the water quality and provide more habitat. All those little different yellow stars and dots on the maps are different restoration projects that we have put in place for those efforts, restoration projects. If you notice, once we get into the Philadelphia area of the watershed, there are no creeks and streams. It's just the main stem of Tacony Creek Park. And because there's less creeks and streams, the efforts to help improve this area are different because there's not a lot of opportunity to do restoration projects along stream areas. So a lot of the efforts take place within Tacony Creek Park because that's the only place you see the creek at its surface before it makes its way into the Delaware River. And there's a reason for that. So we go to the next slide. So I love this slide because this shows the changes of the creeks within Philadelphia. So the image all the way on the left, historically, this shows all the creeks and streams that were covering the entire Philadelphia County. And the image in the middle is the view of how the creeks look today. So if you can see, a lot of them are missing. All that you can see is basically just that main tree trunk. All the other smaller branches were buried and converted into the city's sewer and stormwater system, which is what we see the image all the way on the right. All those red pipes and lines, that is the creation of what the city of Philadelphia is today. The reason they did this is because back then, all these smaller streams, like historically, people were already known to use the creeks as a way to remove waste. So they see a stream, they see a body of water, and they just dump their waste there. It would take it away into the ocean, and then that's it. But it turns out that there was a lot of people just dumping their waste into the water, and a lot of people were getting sick. So the city had to do something about that. And they realized that since the creeks were getting so polluted and contaminated, they decided, well, the streams and creeks are already being used to remove waste. So let's just turn it into the city's sewer and stormwater system and use it as that function. And that's exactly what they did. And the best way to move waste is to have pipes and straight lines, not so much following the natural curves and bends of a river. So that's what created the city structure today. And so all those smaller streams and creeks, they're still there. They just got transformed. They're underneath our sidewalks, our streets, and they've been piped to channel into a straight line. Next slide. So when the city created the sewer infrastructure, they created two different types of systems. So the system on the right, it's a separate sewer. And a separate sewer just means that, okay, let's show the demonstration. So that just means that as it rains, you have your storm drain, which are located, inlets located in every corner of the streets, that is meant to just capture the rain and quickly remove it from the street, and it has its own pipe directed to a creek or a river. Meanwhile, the sewer pipe from your home when you're doing laundry or taking a shower, that is its own separate pipe that's going to a wastewater treatment plant. So 40% of the Philadelphia was constructed with this system in mind. However, the other 60% of the city of Philadelphia did a combined sewer system. So a combined sewer system is taking those the two pipes that were separate on the right, and they conjoin them into one. So now you have that same pipe of the storm drain, whenever it rains going into the storm drain inlet, is now mixing with the pipe from the sewer in your home whenever you're flushing your toilet, doing laundry, doing dishes. That all that water is mixing with the rainwater. And before, it used to be able to go to the wastewater treatment plant, but now the system, when it gets overloaded, there's an outfall pipe, and that's what we call a CSO, combined sewer overflow. So all of that rainwater mixed with raw diluted sewage is now going into the creek. Next slide. So again, we have the natural environment on the left, as I said earlier, that because there's more green spaces, all of that extra rain has an opportunity to flow into the ground. And you have just about 10% of it being runoff. But the image on the right, when they did the city's sewer infrastructure system, these large amount of homes and constructions and roofs, sidewalks, all of that contributed to less soil. So you have a larger amount of runoff, 55% of it, going into all these stormwater inlets. Because you have a lot more houses, back then when they built the wastewater treatment plant, it was constructed with a certain volume in mind. They didn't anticipate the boom in population growth to have it expand, to expand that system and anticipate the large growth in population to be able to handle all that volume. So you have a large amount of runoff that's going into our sewers and into our stormwater inlets. And next slide. So this is what's creating the huge problem. So stormwater runoff is the #1 source of pollution because of that urban sprawl, because of all those surfaces that the rainwater cannot flow into. So you have all this, not just rainwater, but you have the rainwater mixing in with all the different chemicals and pollutants and litter that you see on our streets, such as plastic bottles and motor oil. All that is flowing into the system and into our creeks. So you have scenarios like the image on the right where it's just too much. So as water quality wise, you can imagine all the wildlife that depend on the water for drinking, as well as all the fish and that live in the creek. This is not a good scenario. Next slide. The other effects that you have of all this volume of water running over the surfaces and rushing into our system is that all this water, because the pipes are in a straight line, you have all this volume just quickly rushing in. And that's why a lot of the creeks, we call that to be a flashy creek, where on a dry day, the water levels are low, and then all of a sudden, if a rain cloud or a storm passes in an hour, sometimes even 30 minutes, the level of the water just rises drastically. So that's a flashy creek. And that's why they're also quite dangerous too. If it's rain, all this water could just all of a sudden rise and sweep you away. So that doesn't prove well for the natural stream banks along the edges of the creek, because when you have all this large volume of water rushing through, you get a lot of stream bank erosion, like demonstrated on the image here. And then you have a lot of large trees and roots that are overhanging. And over time, with large windstorms, that tree will lose its footing and will fall over. So it creates hazards. And not only that, all the different microorganisms that live in the creek, such as the image on the left. Imagine if you're a fish and you're in the water, and all of a sudden, all this soil is being eroded into your environment, into your breathing space. It's the same, it's equivalent to us standing outside and all of a sudden there's a sandstorm or a dust storm that's all of a sudden around us. It'll clog our airways. It'll be difficult to see. It raises the temperature. So that's why this issue is a problem, not just for water quality, but also for the organisms that live in the creek beds. Next slide. So this is an image of one of the outfalls at the end of those pipes. So you have the combined sewer, you have the storm drains going into the pipe, and you have all the sewer pipes from everybody's home mixing into this pipe. And this is what one of those combined sewer outfalls look like. This is located within Tacony Creek Park near I and Ramona and I Street. And it's one of the largest combined sewer outfalls in the city of Philadelphia. It's called T14, and it measures about 21 feet wide and 24 feet tall. That's a really large diameter pipe. You can fit an 18-wheeler truck in there, most likely. So you can imagine during heavy rainfalls, you get over 40 million gallons of water on a rainy day just rushing out into the Frankfurt Creek, carrying all the contaminants and pollutants that we see on our roads, as well as the raw diluted sewage that's mixed in. Next slide. So T14 is just one of 164 different combined sewer outfalls located within the city of Philadelphia. This is a map that the water department created that you can access. The link is there below. And what this is that you can go in and see which of the combined sewer outfalls have been activated, where raw diluted sewage was actively overflowing during a period of rain. And it lets you know if it's red, it means it's currently overflowing. If it's orange, there was no overflow in the past 24 hours. And if it's black, means that there was no overflow in more than 24 hours. So that's a good way to see after a rain, just to kind of see which are the areas in Philadelphia that are a combined sewer overflow system and which have been triggered. Next slide. So this is to demonstrate one of the things that the city of Philadelphia is doing to help reduce the amount of incidences where raw diluted sewage are overflowing through the combined sewer outfalls. So they have it's called the Green City Clean Waters, which is a plan that by the year 2036, the goal is to reduce the amount of raw diluted sewage and the CSOs by 85%. And the way to do that is by recreating the natural environment. So like we said, a natural environment, there's trees, there's soil. The natural environment is better at capturing and absorbing all that extra water, extra runoff that comes from rainstorms. So the image on the left, on the top left, this is a demonstration of like if they were to put a tree trench right where before the water goes into the stormwater inlet, the tree trench would absorb a lot of the water, and it would still, the excess water would then go into the storm drain pipe, into the combined sewer, but it's able to be less water going into the wastewater treatment plant. So therefore, all that water could then be sent to wastewater treatment plant to get treated before being put back into the river, versus having all that raw diluted sewage and stormwater runoff going directly into the creek. In the image on the bottom right are also different other examples that the city will be putting into. The idea is they need to green about 10,000 acres of the city of Philadelphia through different amounts of downspout planters, rain gardens, rain barrels, all of these things with the idea to capture all that extra runoff and rainwater before it goes into our stormwater or sewer system. Next slide. Okay, so before we proceed with what are some of the things that you can do to help reduce some of these impacts, this is an opportunity for questions. I don't know, Brian, do we have any questions in our chat? We'll take a few minutes.
So I don't see any questions in the chat, but since it's a small group, if anybody has questions, if they just want to unmute themselves and ask the question and just remute themselves, that's also fine as well.
No? We continue? Okay. All right, excellent. So first things first, one of the things that you can do, since one of the main problems is litter on the streets, and when it rains, all that litter is going into the storm drains and ending up in our creeks. This is a simple thing that you can do where you can just go outside and do volunteer cleanups to help reduce the amount of litter that are on the streets that would otherwise go into our storm drains. So this is an example of one of the efforts that we've been doing since March. We have these cleanup kits that are supplied with some gloves, some trash grabbers, trash bags. We also have face masks and coverings, and also some giveaways. We have you'll get a Tacony Creek Park t-shirt and a bandana to cover your face as well. So this is a great way for you to just, as you're walking outside in your neighborhood on your street, you can just bring your family and help clean up as you walk. You're also encouraged, this is the image on the left is a gentleman that's in Tacony Creek Park on the trail. We have a few volunteers that have been going into the park, and as they walk the trail, they also clean up litter and debris along the way. We've been giving these out, so if you're interested in having one of these cleanup kits, if you don't have one already, just send us an email and with your address, and we'll coordinate a time to drop one off for you, and then you can help in this effort to reduce pollution within our watershed. Next slide. So along those same lines of picking up litter, we also have this program that was established by the Philadelphia Water Department in partnership for Delaware Estuary. It's called the Storm Drain Marking Program. So the Storm Drain Marking Program, it's just as it sounds, it's these decals that we have in the middle here. The Water Department recreated each watershed to have its own unique color, its own unique mascot or watershed animal, watershed identity. And that's a great way to then help create awareness as to which watershed you're in when you're in Philadelphia. And so these are different decals. So if you want to mark any of the storm drain inlets within the Tacony Frankfort Creek, you would get the lavender "Keep It Clean, Drains to Tacony Creek" decal, and then those decals would then be glued onto next to a storm drain inlet, like demonstrated on the image on the left. What this does is, one, you're helping to mark and identify each inlet with its correct decal and watershed identity. And on the decal, it also has a number, like if it's clogged or if there's issues, to call the water department. And this is a great way that as you put the decals, you also help to declog the storm drain if there's any litter or debris on the outside, to help remove all that so only rain flows into the inlet. And this is a great way to bring your neighbors and your family and volunteer. This is something that you can do on your own as well as you walk down the streets. Each kit comes with about 15 different decals. And again, we have decals for all the different watersheds, so you're not limited to just the TTF. Next slide. So this is just to point out, all the red dots are all the storm drain inlets just in TTF alone. There's about 12,000 storm drains. The ones that are in the lavender purple color, that's the amount of storm drains that have been marked with the TTF decal. So as you can see, there's a lot of storm drains that still need their marker. This is a huge volunteer effort that requires a lot of folks on the ground to help with this initiative, and just taking a kit and going out there and then putting the decal sticker onto the storm drain inlet. There's also brochures and flyers that we provide with the kit as well. So that way, if there's any businesses or homes along the block, you could leave those brochures and handouts at the door. So that way the neighborhood and the community is also aware that the storm drain has been marked, and what does that mean? And it just, again, it helps to create that awareness that these storm drains go to a creek, and that connection of only rain should go into the drain. We've learned when we've done these storm drain markings in the past, when we have bumped into people asking, oh, what are you doing? And they see us putting these stickers on the storm drain inlets, and we explain, oh, we're marking these decals because this storm drain, all the trash and chemicals that go into this drain are flowing into our creek, and that's where our drinking water comes from. And many times the reactions have been from folks are like, oh, wow, I did not know that. And so they even confess to saying, oh yeah, I would clean my street and I would just sweep all the trash into the storm drain because I just thought that I thought it was going away to get treated, but once they understood that during rainy days, all that debris is going to our creek, it made them more aware and would know not to do that next time. So this effort really does play a role, because this is information that you are now getting that you could then share with the rest of the community as to only rain should go into the drains. And if you want these kits, again, you could just let us know, and then we could provide you with the kit for your watershed with the instructions on how to place the decals and everything. Next slide. Planting native plants. So this one's a fun one. It's also simple to do. So again, natural environments are much better in absorbing all the extra runoff and stormwater. And native plants are a great way to do this, because as you can see in the image in the center, native plants have deeper and longer roots. So I don't know if you could tell, but the little plant all the way on the left, little tiny lines, those are the roots of just lawn or grass. So the roots for grass just only get about 2 inches deep. So when you compare that with all the other native shrubs and flowers to the right of the grass, you have roots that can get up to more than 1 foot deep. And that's important because the deeper the roots are going and burrowing into the ground, these are creating runways and roads directly into the soil, so that when it rains, all the water that's falling onto the flowers of the grass is going to be taken deep into the roots. So there's more chance of absorption of that water versus the grass. I'm sure many times we've seen that once the ground gets oversaturated, there comes a point where the grass cannot absorb all that extra water, and you can really see the water just running over the surface of the grass. So it really is similar to just concrete or pavement. So we encourage a lot of folks to, if you have the opportunity, to remove portions of your grass and lawn and replace it with native plants and flowers, you're adding a benefit of improving and helping to manage the excess stormwater. But you're also getting the added benefit of adding flowers, adding color, and this also provides habitat to a lot of the wildlife in our watershed. So you could go to the next slide. So an example, we have been giving out free seed packets of purple coneflowers, which is this flower on the right. And the purple coneflower is a native plant. It attracts pollinators, butterflies, goldfinches love these. So, and it's a great thing to have in your yard, and they're perennial as well. And this is just one example of one of the native plants that you can have in your yard. And it's a simple thing to help beautify your space as well. And again, if you want one, let us know, and then we could mail you a free seed packet of these flowers. We also have some Blackeyed Susans. Car washing. So after learning how all the different chemicals and pollutants running off the surface of our streets going into our storm drains, you can imagine how washing a car could have some, is a culprit in one of those. So one of the things that we recommend folks to do if you do wash your own car, instead of washing your car directly on the street, directly on pavement, where all that water just runs down the street into a storm drain, is to have it instead on grass, on soil. That way, any of the water that you're using will then have an opportunity to go into the ground, into the soil. And the soil is nature's best filter. Soil has the capacity to be able to absorb and help remove a lot of the contaminants before it reaches the creek systems underground. The next best thing, really ideally, is to take your car to a car wash, because a lot of the car washes, what they do is they recycle their water. And so you're also helping to conserve water as well. And usually when you go to a car wash, it's on a dry day too, so all that water will not be overflowing into the creek because it'll be a dry day. So it works both ways. You're helping for the car wash to recycle its water, and it will go into the main sewer system where it will go to a water treatment plant and not directly into a creek through a stormwater inlet. Next slide. Reducing fertilizer use. So I know it's summertime, so it's the time of the year where everyone has started to mow their lawns or throw grass seeds, and everybody loves green lawns. And but the issue with that, again, as I mentioned in the previous slide, because the roots of the grass are so short, they're just about 2 inches, they don't require a lot of fertilizer or a lot of food. Oftentimes, folks will tend to over fertilize and put more food than is actually needed. And because the roots are so small, grass is not gonna eat all that food. It's the same way if you're fed 2 plates of food, you're just gonna eat one, you're not gonna eat the second plate. So the same thing happens on lawn. So all that extra food and fertilizer will just sit there and not be used. And during the next rainstorm, what's gonna happen is that all that excess nutrients is gonna get washed over the grass as runoff, and it's gonna go flow into the street and then into a stormwater inlet and end up in our creeks. And oftentimes to have excess nutrients and fertilizer into our creeks is not a very good thing, because the same way that food aids in the growth of plants, you can also have blooms of extra vegetation growing into the creek, such as algae blooms, and that causes other issues as well in terms of they'll end up blocking the sunlight and it'll use up a lot of the oxygen. So a lot of the water will be oxygen deprived from the fish and wildlife that live in the creek. So just by over fertilizing your lawn. So one of the things that you can do is one, you don't really need to over fertilize. You can just, a lot of times, like after fall, leaving the leaves has a lot of nutrients that will naturally decompose and end up back into your soil that is beneficial for your lawn. The other thing is if you are gonna fertilize and you know it's gonna rain tomorrow, don't put fertilizer, because it's just gonna end up washing away. And don't use more than you need as well. Also, using compost is another benefit. Instead of using a lot of just fertilizer, organic and compost is able to feed your lawn and your garden with a lot of the nutrients that it needs. Next slide. Pet waste. So this is another one that we see a lot. I know that the times that I walk down to Coney Creek Park, I have to look down and make sure I don't step in dog poop. It's not fun when you do end up stepping in dog poop. And there's a lot of things that we've heard, at least I've heard from folks say that, oh, but it's natural, it's fertilizer, it'll help, you know, it's good for the trees and the grass. And the difference is, you know, what I explain is that dog poop is very similar to human poop, because we eat meat, we're omnivores, and dogs also eat meat. And just because we have meat into our diets, that adds bacterial growth. And that's exactly why, you know, our poop and dog poop, like, it needs to be treated into a wastewater treatment plant. So one of the things that we encourage everyone to do is to be able to pick up after your dog poop and not leave it on the ground, because during rainfall that could get washed into the creek, and all that extra bacteria could also will impact the water quality of the creek. I see there's a hand raised. India, do you have a question? You can unmute yourself and ask a question if you'd like.
Sweetheart, the best organic compost?
Oh, you're asking which is the best organic compost?
Yes.
I don't know off the top of my head. I don't know if Ryan, do you have a suggestion as to because I know that many folks, like you can have your own compost pile, and there's many other websites that you can look into where, you know, you have one, you want to make sure that it has a lot of carbon from
Okay.
vegetation, ideally not from, not made with invasive plants, because we've seen that too, like when you have compost and there was a lot of invasive plants, it tends to spread that. So a combination of a lot of carbon, so cardboard, branches, leaf, or that type of organic matter, and mixed in with some of the nitrogen, so you can put in your, you don't want to put anything dairy wise or anything like that.
Oh,
So,
definitely not. Okay.
so no dairy, mostly just like vegetables and fruits, but definitely needs to, I'm not an expert on this, but there's definitely other websites that advise on how to have a better balance so that you
Okay.
have carbon versus nitrogen when you're making your own compost pile.
I'll check. Thank you, sweetheart.
You're welcome. All right, next slide. Okay, so this one, don't have to worry about this yet. I know that, but this is something that we like to bring up because oftentimes by the time winter is done and all the salt that was placed on the streets and roads, and as the snow melts, you can imagine all those levels of salt and chloride are just draining and flowing down over the roads into the storm drains and into the creeks. And when samples and levels are tested of the creek to measure the amounts of chloride, they're high. They're always really high. And by the time the creek starts to balance itself in terms of neutralizing the levels of chloride into its system, it's winter again. And the same cycle happens again, where everyone's putting salt on the roads and the sidewalks. So it's been a challenge for the streams to be able to handle that large volume of salt. So one of the things that we advise everyone to do is similar to fertilizer, is don't overuse the salt. There's no need to put a lot of salt over your driveway or sidewalk, because the same thing, like some of it will be used, the rest is just excess and will be wasted, and will just sit on the sidewalk until it flows down with snow melt. We also encourage that before you use salt, just to shovel. And shoveling is just it takes a little manual labor and such, but it is good at reducing the need for salt. The other thing you could do is doing like a mix, because really what helps to not slip is just to have a gritty surface to cause friction. So having a sand mixture in with some of the salt, like that will help reduce the amount of salt within that mix. And also you're creating that surface of friction, so that way it helps prevent the formation of ice on the pavement. Okay, next slide. Rain barrels. So this is another great way that you can contribute to reducing and capturing a lot of that excess runoff. So rain barrel in the slide here, it's exactly that. It's a barrel, and oftentimes it has a capacity between 50 to 65 gallons of water. And you install that into your downspout. So the downspouts are just those pipes that, believe it or not, your roofs are little mini watersheds. So every time it rains on your roof, that water is shedding to a specific point. That specific point is a downspout. So one of the ways to help capture all that excess rain running off your roof, instead of having it go directly into the street, which would end up in the storm drains and in our creeks, is to intercept it with this water barrel, with this rain barrel. And then you're helping to hold back 50 to 65 gallons of water. So imagine if every home had one or two of these per house, that's a large volume of water that's being reduced from overflowing our storm drain and sewer systems. there's different areas that do provide rain barrels. We do offer one for purchase, which is that terracotta color rain barrel from Montgomery County. And in Philadelphia, you can go to the next slide, Ryan. If you live in Philadelphia, the city of Philadelphia has a program where you can get a rain barrel for free that the city will provide you and will install it for you as well. It's through their rain check program. And that's the link provided there. And it's a rain check program, and they have, you have to sign up for one of their workshops. And they also provide basics similar to this of a watershed is. They talk more into the Green City Clean Waters program and how that's going to help reduce the incidences of combined sewer overflows in Philadelphia. And aside from rain barrels, they also offer other options such as downspout planters, or they can even look into, if you want a rain garden in your yard or your front yard, they could look into that. Even option for deep paving and putting porous pavers on your driveway. Again, it's just a porous paver is a way to break up that pavement and cement so that water could soak through between the crevices and into the ground. The rain check program, the rain barrel is free, but it's called a rain check program because if you're interested in any of the other stormwater management tools, there is a small cost to the homeowner, and the water department will front the rest. But you sign up through their website, and they ask you like, what are the stormwater management tools you're interested in? And at the moment, I believe the process is on hold. They're not, due to COVID-19, they're not offering workshops at the moment, but I do believe they may have a waiting list. And once things settle down, they'll be able to host workshops and start installing rain barrels again in the city of Philadelphia. Okay, next slide. So this is a simple thing that we can all do. It's conserving water. One of the things, as we've learned, when it rains, because all that water is going into our stormwater system and our sewer system, and it's getting overflowed, we're putting in too much water. One of the things that we can do during rainy days and dry days is to reduce the use of water within our homes. So taking shorter showers, a 5-minute shower. Other simple things are, if you have a dishwasher, make sure to put the dishes with a full dishwasher. Even flushing toilets. If it's raining outside, flush the toilet less, let it sit, let it settle, wait until the storm passes or so. And because these are moments where you can consciously say, okay, let me not overload and add more water into a system that I already know is vulnerable, So instead of adding more water into the system, hold back. And this is a website that has a lot of other useful tips of, things like, make sure your faucet is off when you're brushing your teeth. They have a list of like 100+ things that you can do in your home, indoors, outdoors, in your office that will help conserve water. One of the things that I like about it too is that they have a link with some games, and they have a few interactive, simple quizzes and puzzles that make it fun for families and children to also learn about useful ways to conserve water in their home. And in a fun way as to learning why is this important. And because every drop counts. So this is a good resource that I recommend. Next slide. This is another resource that we found that also has this is from the EPA, WaterSense. It's called WaterSense for Kids. And they also have a game available and a quiz that you can download and print out with questions, and it tests your knowledge. And a lot of the knowledge they offer on their website, such as like even here, they say like how much water does a family use in the US, family 4, it's 400 gallons. So that's a lot. And after you learn a lot of these quick facts, they have a game that you can play and test your knowledge. And again, it's ways of being more aware and conscious of the water that we actually use when we're showering or cooking and cleaning, and what are some small, simple steps that we can do to reduce that amount. Okay. Next slide. So this I have because so far a lot of the actions that we've provided has a lot to do with hands-on, going outside, cleaning up, marking storm drains, planting native plants. But this is important because as part of our mission is also the advocacy portion. And because we do a lot of hands-on activities outside, we do partner with a lot of other organizations that advocate for the political policies that are important to make sure that clean water is at the forefront and keep that top of mind, to make sure that the legislation is in place to protect our waters. So Conservation Voters of PA is one of those organizations that I highly recommend that you sign up for the newsletters, and they really make it simple for you to contribute and lend a voice into some of these important policies. They have a page, as an example here, where they have a quick summary of what is being spoken about now. And they provide links where you can just sign a petition and communicate with your local legislator or representative. And it's a great way to advocate to make sure that our clean water and environmental policies are top of mind. So this is a more, as I say, a passive strategy where you're not really outdoors, but it is just as important. Next slide. This is another organization that we work closely with. It's the Coalition for the Delaware River Watershed. And another great organization, similar to Conservation Voters of PA, where they prioritize a lot of the legislations as well. And I recommend signing up to their newsletter. It's a great way to stay informed as to what's happening now with environmental laws and regulations. I included here the latest blog that they have is that Congress introduces the Clean Water for All Act. And they also provide simple steps as what you can do. Call your congressional representative. And they even have sheets where you can go in to help give you guidelines of how to communicate. So again, another great resource, since a lot of these things we can't really do ourselves, but this is why we're a partnership. It takes a community, it takes all of us to really work together and make sure these things are managed and that our voices are heard. Next slide. Okay, and just to end, this is a nice interactive game that Fairmont Waterworks has on their website. I provided their link there. And Fairmont Waterworks is another organization that we work closely with. They also provide a lot of great history on watersheds and how water was provided for the city of Philadelphia. And this is a great little interactive game that I recommend you go into because it has all these clickable interactive spots that you can click and learn about the river, learn about the plants, the scientists that are out on the field collecting data, and all the different wildlife and animals that depend on a healthy creek, a healthy Delaware River, healthy watershed. And so this is just to tie it all in, how the importance of why this work has to be done between all of us, and all the different connections of how what one does in one area of a watershed does impact another area of the watershed down the line, and how even just doing small, simple steps like conserving water will end up making a difference and improving the creeks for not just us, but also all the animals that rely on it. So with that, I will end. And I know I've provided a lot of information. Please feel free to ask me any questions, any thoughts. I'd love to hear from you. Thank you so much. Oh, Ryan, you could go to the next slide. So I just want to provide, this is our office phone number. And if you don't have any questions now, but if you do come up with any questions later, you can email info@TTF Watershed, and also connect with us on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn. We are always providing a lot of updates on our social media sites, and in terms of what other programs we have and other ways that you can get involved. Thank you, India. Any questions? Are you all ready to be Watershed Heroes? Yes? Okay. Well, if there are no other questions, I say thank you all so much for joining.